on this side of the mountains, the wet and dreary side, and fellowship with you. Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Evergrace Church family, for the wonderful hospitality, your faithfulness to the Word of God, your support of missionaries, and all the things that you are doing for our Lord. One of our frontline warriors, Jonathan Meyer, prosecutor, will be presenting today some things on punitive. So this is time for you to check your life, make sure everything's okay, or else you have to face this guy. But we love this guy, we appreciate and respect him. Please welcome him as he presents the Word of God and principles to us today. You do this.
Oh, yeah.
Here, Jonathan, this is your shock collar.
That's right.
Say something wrong.
If I go too long, right?
Yeah.
Lawyer, a microphone. So those that were here yesterday, I spoke on the instructive nature of our law, and it's kind of a two-part conversation. So we also need to talk about the punitive nature of law as soon as my clicker starts working. So there's a difference in systems that we have in the state of Washington. It's the criminal justice system is basically broken into two different parts. We have the adult system. And the idea of the adult system is to punish. I mean, that's why it's there. That's why we have prisons. That's why we have jails, things like that. It's also meant to deter. Hopefully, they'll learn after the first time they've been punished. And hopefully, those on the outside looking in will think, oh, I really don't want to do that because I'll go to jail. Now, the juvenile justice system is somewhat different. The system recognizes that kids are dumb by nature. And so, the idea behind the juvenile justice system is to rehabilitate. So in my county we have Green Hill, which is a juvenile prison, but they don't call it that. They call it a detention facility. They actually call it Green Hill School because they go to school there. And you don't have inmates, you have residents. You don't have a prison, you have a rehabilitation center. And they actually do some really good work there. They have a lot of things that they have to deal with. Right now there's a bunch of gang problems, because all the violent offenders tend to go to Green Hill. So we have 13, 14, 15-year-olds that have been convicted of murder that will identify with a gang. So gang fights are common, but they do other good work. They learn trades. There's an auto body shop, there's an upholstery shop, there's a screen printing shop, and it's a great way for them to learn a skill. And there are some that will get rehabilitated when they're in there. There's actually a kid that was in there. And I say kid because he went there when he was 14. He was convicted of first-degree murder. And he got what they call juvenile life. And what that means is that you're going to be in there until you're 21. Or you can be in there until you're 21. Well, while he was in there, he screwed up again and he assaulted a guard. And what that means is, and in juvenile system, they don't call them guards, they call them counselors. But he assaulted a counselor, so he got another 10 months that he had to serve in the jail. Then he realized, that's not what I want to do with my life. I want to fix my life. I want to rehabilitate my life. He started going to church. He started going to school, got his high school diploma, started going to college. And then I have a friend who's actually the head of security at Green Hill. And so this friend contacted me and said, hey, this kid has really kind of changed his life. Do you think there's anything we can do? And I said, well, I'm not going to do anything for him until I meet him. And the kid's name is, they call him EBTA. His last name is Everybody Talks About. And so I went and met with him, and quite a remarkable story. He actually had changed his life and had turned his life around, and they were actually using him as a tool to go out and talk to other kids at schools about, don't follow my footsteps, don't do what I did. Make sure that you stay on the straight and narrow. And so what we were able to do is we were able to go in and get that 10-month sentence reduced down to 0. And so he's actually in pre-release now. He has a job and is doing quite well. So oftentimes, I should say, a significant number of times, the juvenile rehabilitative system does work. But it's also meant to deter. Obviously, we don't want repeat offenders, and we also want to send the message to other kids. So some choices have built-in consequences. Finger in a light socket, that's pretty immediate. Others aren't so much. Picking on someone bigger than you, obviously, that's going to have an immediate consequence. Drugs. A lot of people think drugs have an immediate consequence, and they do if you're on the outside looking in. If you're on the inside doing the drugs, you don't see the consequences. We saw yesterday the meth sores, okay? The people that actually have those don't see a problem with that. They just like the way that it makes them feel. Murder doesn't necessarily have a built-in consequence because whoever's bothering you is now dead, and so you kind of think it's okay. And theft doesn't necessarily have a built-in consequence. But punishment and views sometimes can change over time, and so there's a lot of reasons why. So change in public opinion. So we used to have boot camps, labor camps, we bust up the rocks, you see the chain gangs on the side of the road. Many states have gotten away from that. Arizona still has them. Washington still has I'm trying to think what it's called, work ethic camp, although it's kind of fallen out of favor. I haven't sent anybody to a work ethic camp in years. They also used to warehouse people, just put them away, forget it, and lock the key. You saw that a lot with mental health patients. They're getting away from that. You've also seen public opinion change as to gay marriage, marijuana. But science is also a reason that our opinions change. So mental health issues, we learn now that warehousing folks is not the answer. We actually have to treat them. There's a gentleman in my county his name is Steve Fullerton. And Steve is a nice guy when he's on his meds. When he's not on his meds, you can count on two things. He's going to drive even though he doesn't have a license. Three things. He's going to have a nice car because every time he's in jail, he collects $1,800 a month in disability. And so he has thousands of dollars waiting for him when he gets out, so he goes out and buys a new car. And then the third thing you can count on him is when you try to stop him for not having a license, you're going to get in a high-speed pursuit. So we had Steve in our jail for 23 months and never did an arraignment. And for those that know the criminal justice system, you have to be arraigned 14 days after your preliminary appearance in court, unless there's an issue. Well, he had mental health issues. He was in there 23 months and was never arraigned because he just kept going to Western State. He'd get on his meds, and then he'd come back and he'd get off his meds. And he'd go to Western State and get on his meds and come back and get off of his meds. So we were able to finally work out a system where he's now out. He has to go to his mental health counselor daily, take his medication, and we get an email at the end of every week that says, yes, he's done what he's supposed to do. If we ever get an email that says he hasn't done what he's supposed to do, we'll put him back in jail. And that's the one place he does not want to be. So we're using that as an incentive. Is it authorized under the law? It is, if you read it the right way. But sometimes you have to come up with clever ways to do the right thing for the right people. So drug addicts. The views have really changed on drug addiction lately. We now have in Lewis County, we have a drug court. We've had one for about 10 years. And that's instead of just sending them off to prison, we do a series of reviews, and it's almost like a self-help program, but we have, I think, 30 people in there, and they're held accountable. If you show up late, you go to jail. If you give a dirty UA, you go to jail. If you give 2 dirty UAs, now all of a sudden you're convicted of a felony. And so we just have a series of checks and balances like that, and it's a good program. There's a 50% dropout rate, so that's huge. So 50% of the people that join this fail. But of the people that graduate, 8% recidivism. So that means only 8% of them is going to come back. On average, our recidivism rate is about 63%. So it does work. It's a pain in the butt, but it works. And it saves us a lot of money. Also a big driver is economics. There's 2 budgets that we work with, the state and the county. Now, there's really not a difference because it's all taxpayer money, but when it's your budget, there is a big difference. So what the legislature has done in the past, if you had 3 prior drug convictions, you went to prison. Now the magic number is 6. So it takes 6 felony drug convictions before you go to prison. And it's also, they've come up with different sentencing options. So we talked about drug court. That is a pre-sentence option or a pre-conviction option. But there's also family therapy, I don't know, parenting sentencing alternative, that's what it is. And so if you have kids, you can get a special sentencing option so you can stay out and take care of your kids. Or if you have a drug addiction, you can do a drug offender sentencing alternative. And that's where you can get 1/2 of the time if you go into treatment. They also have sex offender treatment where you can do as little as a year in jail instead of going to prison for up to 11 years. But the law must fashion consequences because far too often We can't trust people to govern themselves. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday, how the law has to have a definite in there. That's why we have definite ages of when you can drink, when you can drive, when you can be held culpable for a crime. So it has to classify the violation, and there's several different ways to classify the violation. There's an infraction. That's your speeding ticket. That's your, say, spitting on the sidewalk, or whatever law isn't real serious of a violation. Then there's crimes, there's misdemeanors, and that's 0 to 90 days. So a misdemeanor, you can get up to 90 days in jail. And then there's a gross misdemeanor. It used to be 0 to 365 days in jail. And then what they learned on the federal level, if you're in the country illegally and you have the ability to be sentenced to a year or more in jail, then you could be deported. So Washington said, oh wait, that's not what we intended, so now you can get 364 days in jail. They just lessened it by 1 day. And that's to address that issue. And then you have felony. You have a Class A felony, you can get up to life in prison. Class B felony, up to 10 years in prison. Unless it's a repeat drug offense, then it can be 20 years. And then a Class C felony, you can get up to 5 years in prison. So how Washington works. So we have non-felony sentencing, and that can vary from court to court because you have, the problem with any system is humans, okay? So once you get humans involved, their opinions and the way they view things can vary. So you have DUIs, and that really varies from court to court, even in my county. So we have Centralia and Chehalis are our two big cities. They each have their own court. The problem is they have to pay the county jail $50 a day for every time they put someone in there. Well, that's going to be a very big hit on their budget. So they tend to deal away DUIs. Now at the county level, we take DUIs very seriously. We just had a gentleman who was sentenced for a DUI, and we gave him a year. Actually, he earned it, I always think. He earned a year in jail, 364 days. He also had a DUI that he had pled guilty to last year, which had nearly a year that was hanging over his head. That was unsuspended. So he's in there for over 2 years. And the great thing about it is the judge can impose that entire fine for keeping him in jail. So when everything was said and done, he now not only has to spend over 2 years in the county jail, he also owes us $160,000. So that's the difference. I mean, just going across the city line, you're now subject to that. So felony, the way that Washington works is felonies are broken down into A, B, or C, just like we just talked about. And then there's levels, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and level 5, which doesn't really matter for our purposes here. But Washington works on points. And let me see if I can pull up an example of a scoring sheet here. Maybe. Oh, nope, I can't because we don't have Wi-Fi here. But if you were to see a scoring sheet, it truly is just what you would think. It has a grid on it, and Washington goes from 0 to 9 points. The more points you have, the longer you do. There we go. And if you have 9 or more points, that's the top of the grid. Now, Washington also says if you have over 9 points, that means you're a really bad person, and we can actually give you more time. That's called a free crime aggravator. When what they're saying is you've had so many points that you need to go to jail longer because you're just not getting it. So it ranges. There will be some crimes that a 0-point offense, you'll 0 to 60 days in jail. There are others, it'll be 120 months in jail. Then we also have aggravators. So for drug offenses, if you're within 1,000 feet of a bus stop, or if you're within 1,000 feet of a school or a public park or a library or something along those lines. If you commit a crime with a gun, that's also an aggravator, or a knife, that can be an aggravator. If the victim of your crime, oh, Jesse's passing me notes.
Yeah. We can get Wi-Fi if you use that password.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So there's also other aggravators. So if your victim is particularly vulnerable, that can be an aggravator. For instance, I told you the story yesterday about the woman who decapitated her child. That was an exceptionally vulnerable victim. And so we added that aggravator. She also abused a position of trust. That's also an aggravator. So there's a lot of different aggravators. We enjoy using the rapid recidivism aggravator. So if you get out of jail and you do another crime real quick, we'll use that. And we had a huge spike in thefts from employers. And so we use the large economic impact aggravator. Because right now I'm prosecuting a guy who stole $40,000 worth of cell phones from UPS. So we also have 3 strikes, you're out. And that's not what everybody thinks it is. It's not, bless you, it's not just 3 felony offenses. It's 3 certain felony offenses. So 3 murders, 3 assaults, combination thereof, serious offenses. And since I've been in office, we've sentenced 1 person under 3 strikes, you're out. And what that says is once you've committed that 3rd felony, you're done. You're just going to go away for life. But it can't just be 3 felonies, boom, boom, boom. So if I go out and kill 3 people, that's not 3 strikes. That's 1. So you have to commit the strike, go and get sentenced, commit another strike, get sentenced, and then commit a 3rd strike. So Washington also has a lesser-known 2 strikes, you're out law. And that deals with sex offenses. And we've had, since I've been in office, we haven't sentenced anyone because no one's been eligible under the 2 strikes, you're out. Lewis County has sentenced 1 person under 2 strikes, you're out, and that's when I was in private practice, and that guy was actually my client. It didn't go so well. So we also have life in prison, and we have the infamous death penalty. And so I want to talk a little bit about the death penalty. One of the things that the law strives to do is have a definite consequence for your actions. And so Washington is one of the states that has a death penalty. If you are convicted of aggravated first-degree murder, you're eligible for 2 sentences. Life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. In the state of Washington, it is up to the prosecutor to decide which one they're going to go for. It's up to the jury to decide if they're going to convict and recommend the death penalty. And then it's up to the judge to sentence the person. Currently, there are 9 people on death row. Many of you probably have heard a couple months back that our governor said he was not going to sign a death warrant. So, and I guess that's his prerogative. If you read the law, he didn't follow the law, and he certainly didn't follow the spirit of the law. What bothers me about that is the way he went about doing it. Governor Inslee, during his speech, said that he spoke with prosecutors about that. In Washington, there's 39 of us. Okay, there's 39 elected prosecutors, 1 for each county. It's not a whole lot of phone calls, but he didn't talk to any of us. That wasn't true. He did speak with Kitsap County prosecutor, but they did not speak about getting rid of the death penalty. They talked about Kitsap County's death penalty case. So Snohomish County prosecutor Mark Rowe actually got to meet with the governor after he announced that decision and after he said that he had spoken with prosecutors. And Mark Rowe has a guy on death row who killed a prison guard, Jamie Bendel. That guy was already serving a life sentence. So obviously Mark Rowe wanted to know what was going on with that. I won't use the exact verbiage that he used during that conversation, but suffice it to say it was a less than pleasant conversation. When I heard the announcement, and he said that he had talked to prosecutors from around the state, I sent out an email. That's how hard it is for me to get a hold of the other 38 elected prosecutors. So I sent out an email saying, okay, who did he talk to? Because I wasn't happy. I wanted to know what was said and all of that. And the answer resoundingly came back, not me, not me, not me, not me. So then I sent an email to the governor, and I said, specifically, which prosecutors did you speak to? That was one day after he made his announcement. That was about 2 months ago. I'm hoping one day he will return my email. He hasn't done that yet. So in response to that, the legislature, Senator O'Ban from Pierce County, introduced a bill which required the governor to use the Clemency and Pardon Board to review death penalty cases before he made a decision. Whether the governor signs a death warrant or not is up to him. No one can force him to do that, and we all agree. But it needs to be a case-by-case analysis. That's what the Clemency and Pardon Board envisions. That's what the law envisions. And so Senator Oban had a bill, and I was the one invited down to speak on behalf of prosecutors. And he also invited down victims of people who have the murderers on death row. I met with 5 different families of the 9, and not one of them had been talked to by the governor, despite his assertions that he had talked to the families as well. One of the family members who's out of Spokane, her daughter was murdered and her other daughter was raped and almost murdered, said that she found out about it when a reporter from the local TV station called and asked for her reaction. So, we do have the death penalty still. He did not outlaw the death penalty. We can still use it. He just won't sign any warrants. And so, what the prosecutors have decided, it's not going to change a thing that we do. The governor said that one of the reasons he won't sign a death penalty warrant is because he's worried about an innocent person being put to death. Well, he also said he has no doubt about the guilt of the people that are on death row right now. And in fact, no one on death row has ever been released because they were innocent. They have had their convictions overturned because of different issues. Most common issue that they're overturned for is ineffective assistance of defense counsel, not anything the big bad state has done. He also said that it is wildly expensive to go after the death penalty, and he's right. Kane County has a case right now. They're $7 million into it, and they haven't even gone to trial. But that's part of it. And so that's my political soapbox for death penalty. So the question is, can the punishment also be instructive? So think of your child at home. You can tell them all day long not to run, right? Don't run across the concrete sidewalk. Are they going to listen? No. It's when they trip, fall, and skin their knee or something like that that they actually learn. So we use timeouts, grounding, spanking. Words can often be empty. So who is it we're instructing? Obviously, we're trying to instruct the criminal. We want to tell the person that did this, hey, this is a bad thing. Society says no. You can't do this, so conform. We're also trying to instruct the victim sometimes, because you have situations where you, say, have an underage person having sex with an older person. We're also trying to instruct that person, hey, if you do this, that guy's going to go to prison. But sometimes, more importantly, we're trying to instruct the public. We're trying to let the public as a whole know that what this person done isn't acceptable. What we've done in Lewis County to try to underscore this is we've actually, I won't say gone overboard, but we've gone the extra step in some of our cases. I spoke yesterday of the man who raped and beat his girlfriend's 2.5-year-old child, and she ended up dying. He was charged and convicted of homicide by abuse. Problem is, mom had been told by her friends that this guy's a monster, don't let him around your kid. So we waited and waited and waited. We allowed her to speak at sentencing. When sentencing was done, I called her down to my office and I said, here's your papers, we're charging you too. And we charged her with reckless endangerment. And I said, we're going to make one sentencing recommendation. It's going to be an exceptional sentence of up to a year and a day in prison, because the top of the standard range was a year. And I said, if you don't accept that, I will charge you with the same thing I charged him with. I will charge you as an accessory, and I will try to send you to prison for life. So that was an awkward time, because her defense attorney was actually my assistant coach for my softball team. So it made for some very tense practices for the kid. But she is in prison. And then we just had another man who was convicted of assaulting his child, or his girlfriend's child, and almost doing like a waterboard torture to try to discipline him. And so we charged him, convicted him. We also waited, and as soon as the case was done, we arrested her. That drives the police nuts, because they want to arrest everybody right away. And so we have to explain to them that sometimes you just have to wait. Because if we arrest the mothers right away, then they can't testify, they won't testify, and then our case goes away against the boyfriend. We also, I spoke yesterday about the woman who threw a party at her house for her kids so they wouldn't go out and drink on the logging roads. We charged her with 18 counts of MIP. That was to send a message to society that this isn't okay. You can't let your kids drink. So, in closing, without laws, we have chaos, disorder, and it would be a situation where the strongest rule and the weakest suffer. There'd be no predictability, no consequences, And we simply can't live with that. So that's why we have the Constitution, the ultimate law of the land. We have the Washington State Constitution, and we spoke yesterday how the United States Constitution is the floor. That's the minimum rights we have. And the Washington State Constitution is the ceiling. That's the maximum rights we have. But above that, we have our personal morals and values. And you often hear that people are amoral, they don't have any morals. I always disagree. They just don't have the same morals that I do. Even your skinhead murderers will have some type of moral compass. It's just really screwed up. And then we have the Bible, obviously. And that, to me, that's our ultimate compass that we need to follow. So what I always tell my staff and my kids, perfection is not attainable, but if we chase perfection, we can catch excellence. And I'm big for sports analogies, so that's from Vince Lombardi. So that's it. Any questions?
I often hear our Supreme Court judge and our prosecutors express frustration over sentencing guidelines set by Olympia. Like you mentioned, that woman that allowed her child to be abused by that guy. She gets a year and a day for that. I mean, that just boils my blood. She ought to go away forever. As complicit to the crime and contributing. But I hear our judge often say, I'd like to sentence you to more,
right,
but our sentencing guidelines set by Olympia are, how do we change that?
Well,
or can it be changed?
It used to be changed. It used to be that, you would have a Class A felony, the judge could sentence you anywhere inside the sentencing range that he wanted to. And what they found out was that places like Lewis County would be a heck of a lot different than places like Thurston County. Lewis County, where I'm from, is very conservative, very kind of Old West type. We like to punish people that break the law. Thurston County, on the other hand, is more of a, can't we all just get along? We love one another, and much more liberal. We have cases where we'll look at maybe changing venue, and we won't change it. We don't want to change it to Thurston County because we'll probably lose. So we'll look, and we may want to change it to Grace Harbor because Grace Harbor is more like us. Pacific County is more like us. But if you have Cowlitz County, which is to the south of us, Thurston County, which is to the north of us, they are very liberal counties. And so the reason that they came out with the sentencing guidelines is to basically standardize all of these different crimes and what the punishments can be. So we've gotten more inventive with how we charge things, and we've tried to get things to kind of wedge into the law. But there are some times where you just look at it and you say, that's not enough. We just don't have enough power behind this. And the Sentencing Guideline Commission is in charge of that. The legislature is in charge of that. I actually sit on the Sex Offender Policy Board, which is probably one of the more frustrating boards that I sit on, because they just want to treat everybody. And I'm of the opinion that, okay, some people need treatment, some people need punishment. So for instance, you have the SOSA, which is the Sex Offender Sentencing Alternative. That's not available to someone who is a stranger to the victim, or the only connection is the sex. They want to change that now. The reason that the sex offender policy, or the reason that the sex offender treatment was even put in, was to encourage family members to come forward because their loved one can get treatment. Before, they would just sit silent because they didn't want to send dad to prison, because that's how they made a living, that's how they paid for things. And so they came out with this system to allow him to continue working and to encourage kids to come forward. But it is infuriating sometimes.
Thank you.
What kind of success do you see from the sex offender treatment?
The recidivism is less. It is still the majority of sex offenses go unreported. I mean, that's a fact that we're always going to have to deal with. But recidivism for like sex offenses is, I think, somewhere in the 40%, which is a good reduction. But they also have failure to register as a sex offender. That's a new crime that they're eligible for, and that's huge. The first offense is 0 to 365 days. That's what they call an unranked felony. The second offense, I mean, you're in prison for like 3 years. So that's something that they take very seriously.
Repeat that last phrase, the statement you had on the board.
Which one? The Vince Lombardi one?
That perfection is not attainable.
But if you-
It is attainable
No, but if you chase perfection, you will catch excellence.
Could I get your opinion on a situation where you have states, laws that infringe on the U.S. Constitution? We're seeing more and more of that on different levels. What's a Christian supposed to do in a situation like that?
Well, we'll never get in trouble for obeying the law. I mean, that's the easy thing to say. But it's one of those that you have to be guided by your moral compass. So I can't sit up here as a prosecutor and say, disobey the law. But what I can say is you have to be guided by your own moral compass. They can't force you to do something that you don't want to do. They can force you to associate with people you don't want to associate with. They can force you to hang around people you don't necessarily want to hang around with. But, like I said, with the United States Constitution being the least amount of rights, the state constitution could grant you more rights. So theoretically, the state constitution cannot infringe on the United States Constitution. But it happens. Anything else? Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, John. I guess we'll see you probably Thursday.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Well, this concludes our morning session, and we'll take a short break. Before we actually take the break, I want to express my gratitude to all of the ladies pitched in and did the fantastic job that they did in the decoration of the room, the setting up of the tables, and let us men off the hook, and I guess maybe not quite. But you ladies did a fantastic job with the food. Yes. And it is great to come in here. We've come in here sometimes and they've had parties the night before. Beer on the floor, the tables are sticky, there's vomit on the floor downstairs. These ladies have done just a great job of preparing this venue here for us today. And so I want to extend my personal thanks as the pastor of the church, and I know that I speak for everyone else, because I've heard comments about how nice it's been and how flawlessly the distribution of the food has been. That has been very good, and the food was like delicious, so you can't beat that. So I want to thank you for that, and so let's take a break and then we'll be back here in a few minutes.